twilight hours, voices sing tales of hope and heartbreak, everything a rhythmic blend.
Okay, I think we can start. Hi, Elizabeth. Good to see you. My name is Adam Świtała. I am a member of the ISME Advocacy Standing Committee and Commissioner of the Mistec Music in Schools and Teacher Education Commission. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session of the ISME Online Cafe. Each meeting of the Online Cafe is hosted by a different member, one of the ISME committees or special interest groups. And the main purpose of our meetings is to provide a platform for music education practitioners and for students to share, discuss, and reflect on their experiences and narratives while learning from and with one another in an atmosphere of safety, trust, and mutual support. By participating in the meeting, and this is something that we always begin with, we all agree to and take responsibility for the following. We aim at creating a welcoming and inclusive environment. We accept and honor diverse perspectives. We cultivate a sense of belonging and trust. We cultivate open and honest communication. We foster the health and well-being of all participants. We listen, respond, and disagree respectfully and avoid judgmental statements towards others. One more information, this meeting is being recorded. So if you prefer to, for your video or picture to not be in the recording, you can just turn off your camera and then you will still be able to participate, but you will not be visible in the recording. Okay, so today's session is special. It will be a slightly different formula from our usual cafes, which I'm sure is also one of the reasons why many of you are here with us today. And with that in mind, we would like to offer a little more time to our experts and then go into a Q&A session, which means that we will have approximately 45 minutes of presentations, during which all of you can post questions in the chat window. So this is how we are going to do it today. If you have questions that arise as you listen to the presentations, you can put them in the chat right away, and then we will have a look at all the questions, and our today's speakers will address them in the Q&A part of the meeting. And the meeting is scheduled to last for about 60 to 90 minutes. We will see how it goes. Those of you who appreciate the low structure, high engagement, community time during the cafe sessions, we assure you that we'll have more of it again in the next meetings. And now I will introduce our today's guests. So our wonderful experts today are Dr. Alex Ruthman, who is an associate professor and area head of interactive media and business at the NYU Shanghai program on creativity and innovation, where he teaches courses at the intersection of music, business, education, technology, design, and entrepreneurship. And he also leads the NYU Music Experience Design Lab, which researches and co-designs new technologies and experiences for music making, learning, and engagement with youth, school community, and industry partners worldwide. And he is currently also a co-editor of the International Journal of Music Education. Dr. Gwen Moore has over 25 years of experience teaching music at primary, secondary, and higher levels of education. She is an associate professor of music education at Mary Immaculate College, Limerick, and has been working in initial teacher education since 2006. Dr. Moore was also the director of teaching and learning at MIC from 2016 to 2023, where she provided strategic leadership in the development of teaching, learning, assessment, and feedback at institutional and national level. She is also one of the co-editors of the International Journal of Music Education. And Dr. Francisco Javier Zerza, who is the senior lecturer at the University of Zaragoza, Spain, and also a co-editor of the International Journal of Music Education. So I hope that I did a good job introducing you. Please add something if there's something that I missed that is really important. And I think that's all from me, and the floor is yours. And I look forward to learning from you very much.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Adam. Again, I'm Alex Ruthman, and one of the three co-editors here with my colleagues of the International Journal of Music Education, and really happy today to be presenting to you and engaging your questions around engaging in peer review and feedback, which is one of the most important aspects of our role in promoting engagement around our journal. With that. And so we wanted to kind of organize our webinar today with you into 5 sections. One, starting with a brief overview of the journal, its aims, its scope, its purposes. Then moving into our roles as co-editors, because you might be familiar of IJME through reading the articles or maybe writing, submitting an article as an author, or maybe having served as one of our peer reviewers. But we wanted to also kind of peel back the layers of our roles and how that impacts peer review and feedback, and then kind of go into the role of the peer reviewer. Some of you might be brand new to this, learning about the role. Some of you might be seasoned. So we're really interested in the wide diversity of questions and discussion items that you have. We're really facing a really interesting time in the world of journal publishing and peer review in the age of AI and all sorts of other kinds of things. And we want to also be sure to spend time talking about some of the current challenges for peer review that really have emerged for us really in the past 3 to 5 years that we want to center with you and discuss. And then as we go through, we encourage you, as Adam said, to please put your questions in the chat. We will try to monitor that, and if it makes sense to address it in before, we will do that. Otherwise, we will save them for the end and open up from there, and then for your Q&A. So a quick thing to note on here is that you can learn more about the journal via the web link that's posted on this slide. And we also have a new, simpler email address, ijme@isme.org, which goes to the 3 of us as the co-editors. So if you have any questions or want specific feedback on a process or an article, you can always message us and find us there. But before we start, I wanted to open it up to see whether my colleagues, Francisco and Gwen, if you had anything you wanted to say before we got started.
Fine to me.
That sounds great, Alex. Happy to rock.
Great. So we'll move forward. So, the International Journal of Music Education, we are ISME's flagship international research journal. We've been around this is our 43rd year of publishing research and articles here in 2025, a long, long history with a lot of great contributions to scholarship. And because we're part of ISME, we have a special mission to really highlight and promote research from all over the world. to an audience that is also international, which kind of flavors the uniqueness of IJME. It's an opportunity to publish research that's not only conducted across different countries and that, but even research that's based in a particular country but has relevance to an international readership. We're published now online first, which means that once you get your article accepted, it's available online within a month generally with that, and then it's assembled into issues. And in the past, we have published 4 issues a year with about 7 articles per issue, but we're now in the process of moving to publishing almost solely online with an option to order a print copy on demand, which means that we will more than likely be increasing the number of issues issues per volume in the near future coming out, because we're experiencing a very large demand and submission backlog of great articles, and we want to make sure we get them out in a timely way. Again, as a reminder, online access to IJME is free if you're an ISME member. So if you aren't, it's a great perk to have with that. ISME is now moving to completely online, so we're no longer going to be shipping the paper version to you to help save money and open up new opportunities. And IJME now is receiving over 500 submissions per year. This is almost doubled in the past 4 years with that. So there's a huge demand from scholars around the world to get their research considered by IJME, by our peer review corps, and to hopefully get things published and work with that. So we're very happy that there's a large demand, but that's also created all sorts of kind of interesting challenges for us as a journal. Just to let you know, when we receive a journal article, we spend time reading it, and about 50% of the submissions that come into us are rejected at what we call at the desk. And that's just because it doesn't have to do with music teaching and learning, or maybe it's about more specifically about music psychology, or it's about musicology and isn't really about core issues of music learning and teaching, or implications haven't been drawn to the field of music teaching and learning. And I've included in here a quick posting of our aims and scope for IJME. This is posted again on our website, but it's also here for you to take a look at. And so just looking at it there, what we publish are scholarly works representing empirical research in a variety of modalities, with a special interest towards an international constituency. We are part of ISME. Our readers are from around the world. So it's important that the submissions to us are contextualized within research literature that's global and speak to and describe the music education practices that are being researched in a deep enough way so that somebody from a different country is going to easily be able to understand that and understand your findings, which is maybe a little different than if you were writing an article within your country for a journal that's published in your country, where you might be able to assume that the readers are familiar with the ways that music education happens in your country. So because we're international, that's also a key criteria for us in that, so that you're looking at research literature from around the world and helping readers understand who might not be from your geographic location or knowledgeable with the practice you're looking at. We're interested in looking at music teaching and learning at all age levels, in the classroom, in the studio, at home, in the community, anywhere music teaching and learning happens, private and group instruction. And with this, we want to make sure that you're also engaging with contemporary research literature, and primarily making citations to articles that are within the past 10 to 15 years, unless it's a historical study and kind of working in that. There's always exceptions. But overall, writing pieces that are, that are going to be readable and relevant to an international representation. And just a little quick couple things more about that. Our basic requirements for publishing in the journal is we're looking for articles of generally no more than 6,000 words. We have some flexibility with that. We can always publish a supplemental file or appendices or web and media. And because we're now publishing primarily online, we can take all of the color graphs and figures you have to put in there. There's not additional fees for that. I'm going to pass it over a little bit here to Francisco to talk a little bit about some of our criteria around the quantitative studies, because this is something that we often will do an initial review, and then we find that there might not, some of the submissions to us might not meet some of the standards with that. So we wanted to go over that with you now. Francisco?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I just wanted to talk to you about a brief summary about what we're waiting or expecting for you authors to send to the journal in terms of being a list, not desk projected from the very beginning. I'm talking about quantity. We've seen many times that there is a lack of coherent explanation about how the participants have been gathered in terms of sample selection and sampling criteria, whether they've been randomized or stratified, or we have had, I mean, the researchers have had a convenience sample thing with the people, and we having some papers too that they do not speak properly well about the adequate sample size based on statistical power. Maybe sometimes you need to use some G-power stats calculus, or is talking about, all right, this we know that is not representative, but we've done as much as we can, so we are having these kind of limitations. Sometimes it's really important to talk about limitations more than trying to be perfect. If the authors just acknowledge that, all right, this is what we get, we know that we have some limits in terms of make the results general to all people, to all the world, all right, we can give it a go in terms of not just desk projected. And all the flows that we are seeing many times also is just we can call it the sample characterization in terms of age, mean age, gender, different kind of educational levels. I mean, in terms of the description of the sample data, if I'm reading or when or while we are reading a paper and we have noted this kind of information, we cannot find a proper reviewer, and we cannot understand what you're talking about. So it's going to lead almost 100% to a desk reject, let's say, because those little flows, they're getting in a pile like one flow, one mistake. I mean, one misinformation. So in the end, it's like, all right, we're having more than 500 papers per year, so we cannot. I mean, we're having a traffic jam, let's say, in terms of reviewing process. So, second important thing in terms of quantity thing, it's when you talk about the instruments that you have used to gather the quantity information, we need a very detailed information and description of the instrument that you have used for data collection in terms of validation procedures that the instrument has had. Many times we can read, we've used this instrument that was adapted from English version to, I don't know, I'm just making things up, to Portuguese, but we know nothing about this process. Who's been in charge with the whole process, who's been in the back, who has reviewed the translation, who's reviewed the adaptation to the, I mean, making things up as an example, to the Portuguese educational system. So it is not a mere instrument that, all right, we're having random sample and random data. We do not like, I mean, we need to be able to replicate the study in some other context. And if the author does not provide this information to the reader, we cannot give it a go, because we put in I mean, on the place of the reader and said, how can I replicate this study if I have had no idea how do they come up with the Portuguese version, for example, right? And in terms of validation, arises the problem of the sample size again. We're used to read about quantity term in quantity studies with samples really, really small. I mean, it is really hard to accept samples with less than 50 people. And when comparing groups, the ideal thing, at least, will be just comparing 50 to 75 people with 50 to 75 people. Many times we're having less than 40 people. And it leads to the next problem. What kind of quantity analysis are you using to explain the things that you want to explain? If you're going to, this is really, really a precise thing, but if you go into parametric tests, like analysis of variance, t-test, and all those kind of big sample size, and you're having less than 50 people, it's like, all right, I'm not going to believe those data, and I cannot make a general result with less than 30 people. So what kind of test are you using, and for what reason are you using these tests? And we've seen many, many times in a lot of papers that it becomes kind of a show off, like, all right, I know how to run those stats because on YouTube somebody has said that this is no, this is not the point. I mean, nobody is showing off here. The stats must serve to the educational process of music acquiring. Do you know what I mean? Am I being understandable, more or less? Yes or no? Well, I need a bit of feedback. All right, you're nodding too, more or less. And sometimes in terms of big data, I'm really nitpicky on that, but I really like to read that somebody has taken care enough to talk about normal distribution and whether the data they respond to normal or non-normal, and according to that distribution, they have selected to run this test or this other test or this other test in order to make the results more reliable. So the conclusions can be relying on some strong results, right? And also, it is really important when talking about quantity that you're using as many tables as you have to, but no more tables that you need to use to. And you need to make sure that the table and the data that you've run and you've written in your paper are exactly the data that you want to talk about in the results comment, and that you're joining, leaning with the, let's say, introduction and with the theoretical framework. So you're not providing, please, more data than you need to. We know that stats can be really tricky, but this is not a methodological journal. And our readers are not, I mean, they don't need to know a lot about stats, but you need to make stats really readable for them. So this is not a show off. If you're really good at stats, you go with your stats mind to, but you need to make your think about music education readable for everybody. This is our mission as editors to, all right, to conserve the level of the journal, absolutely, but to make it readable for everybody. So make these stats accessible to everybody, right? And yeah, more or less, I think that was the key insights about stats. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think the big themes to take away from there is that no matter what article you're submitting, just to be very clear in communicating your methodology. What processes did you go through and what do they mean? And are they well matched to your research questions and with that? And so that's first on our mind when we're going through and looking through with that. And it's something that we have our peer reviewers also look at. On the again, on the slides here, these are a bullet listing of the things that we now ask for all authors to provide to us with their manuscript. We want to see that they've met the word limit, that they are following APA 7 formatting guidelines, that you've included, if your research has human subjects, that you've fully described the research protocol that you've gone through. Most research with human subjects is going to be overseen by your institution's institutional review board, with some exceptions, at which if you have questions about that, you can always email us with that. We also need to know, was the research funded? Are there any conflicts of interest? For instance, are you working for the company that's commissioning the research or the organization that we need to know about, that are just part of disclosing for trustworthiness and reliability in that, so that if you are an insider with that perspective, that you're disclosing that as part of your methods and as part of your submission. And we've also moved to a process where for articles that are written by multiple authors, that each of you disclose the individual contribution that you made throughout the research process. And that's now formalized with that, so that we can understand what are the roles that everybody on the author team played. And also, now that we're in the age of artificial intelligence, if you have used artificial intelligence to assist in your writing or for translation or third-party editing, that you have disclosed that up front, and it's not something you're hiding. It's not something you need to hide. It's a pervasive tool now. We're all figuring out how to use it, and one way to use it ethically is to disclose it. And that comes to us as the editors. Also, my opinion is that if you're using it, that should be part of your research method. So if you're using AI to help you translate or to help consider certain things, that should be part of your research methodology that you share and work with that. And also throughout this process, the other thing is to make sure that the manuscripts and the reviewer comments that we get are anonymized, because IJME uses what's called a double-blind peer review process, where the author's identities are blind from the reviewer, and the reviewer's identities are blind to the author with that. And we do our best to maintain that anonymity and throughout the review process. I put just a few bits, a little about IJME here again. We generally try to get back with you on an average of 35 days from when you submit it to whether or not it's going forward for peer review or whether or not it's desk rejected. And actually that first decision is that if it goes on to peer review, we try to also get that decision back to you within 30 days. But all of the peer reviewers, and hopefully you, if you haven't been a peer reviewer for us, will be agreeing to get back to us with these reviews within 2 to 3 weeks. So that we can turn things around in a timely way. And then once it's accepted, then we try to get it online within 30 days. So we try to move pretty quickly. About the quickest an article can move from submission to publication is about 3 months. Most are closer to 6 months, 5 to 6 months. It just depends on how many revisions, if any, go through and working with that. So from there, we want to move in. This is my little pet peeve that I edit a lot. Again, going back to document anonymization, we expect our articles submitted in as Microsoft Word or in PDF. If you submit it in Word, it's really easy to leave your author name in the document properties and to last save, and that's something that we review and then we'll unsubmit and send back to you. It's really important to watch this so that when you send your files to us, it doesn't have embedded in the document your name or another co-author's name, so that because that will get in the way of anonymization. Also, if you're providing peer review and you're adding comments in, that it doesn't also reveal your name. So this is something that happens maybe with 70 to 80% of the submissions to us, that some of our authors leave this step out. So we encourage you to do that. That's my little point for today. Moving on. We wanted to kind of open it up again to the roles of the co-editors. And as was mentioned before, we do what's called an initial desk review, looking to see, does it fit our aims and scope? Do they fit the guidelines? If so, great. We then forward it on to peer review, but sometimes if we're missing things, we will unsubmit it and ask you to change that. Or if we don't find that it's a good fit, or if there are major flaws, where we feel that it's not going to be successful if we send it to peer review, or with that, we will go ahead and reject it and give you rationale behind that so that you can hopefully take that feedback, maybe adjust it for submission to maybe a more appropriate journal, or to go back and relook at procedures. But at that point, you would have to resubmit it under a different topic. And then from there, we try to do our best to get 3 peer reviewers assigned to each article, but sometimes it ends up being only 2. That's one reason why we're doing this call today, because we're also hoping to get you interested in providing peer review as an essential kind of service to our profession. We need good peer reviewers who are willing to give constructive feedback, and do this, because the future of our field is through our mutual kind of commitment to reviewing and adding feedback, because you're going to want that for your research as well. So we do that, and IJME is a little different from some journals in that we choose our reviewers both from our editorial board. So you can look at our list of editorial board and think, who might we be assigning? But also, we look at your reference list. We look at the broader field, and if we feel that there's another scholar in the field who might be a good person for that, we will invite them to volunteer and do that as well. Not every journal does that. But it's also because we have such a large volume of submissions. It's a challenge to have everybody, because we try to only have our peer reviewers work on one article at a time. And then the other thing we do is that as peer reviewers share their anonymous comments on a manuscript, we also share those back with the other peer reviewers, so that if you're a reviewer, you can see what the other peer reviewers' comments were. They're still anonymous, you don't know who they are, but it allows you to kind of see how do your review comments match up with somebody else's with that. So we're doing that also for professional development for reviewers with that. And if you ever have a question about it, we're always here. You can always email us and ask. We're happy to look through that. And for us as co-editors, we serve staggered 6-year terms. I'm in my last 2 years, and then Francisco and Gwen. So we do that to make sure that we have fresh eyes serving in these roles and doing with that. And as Francisco mentioned earlier, our main goal here is to ethically manage the perspectives of both authors and reviewers. So not only are we here to make sure that reviewers, that authors, are listening to and following feedback to the extent that they need to from a reviewer, we're also here to make sure that the comments from reviewers are ethically framed and written towards authors. Everybody here has rights to be heard and to argue with that. And at the end of the day, it's really up to you as the author to choose what feedback, particularly if you get conflicting feedback from reviewers, you want to follow and work with that. And our job as co-editors is to really help moderate that and make sure that the voice of the author is preserved to the extent possible. Sometimes they become irreconcilable, and an author wants to go in one direction, but the peer reviewers want to go in another, and then we have to make a tough decision about that. But basically, we get the feedback from the reviewers, and we as co-editors make the decision about, is it minor revisions? Is it major revisions? Do we accept it as is, or do we reject it? And we try our best to make sure that most articles that we move to peer review, we believe will only need maybe 1 or maybe 2 rounds of revisions. But occasionally we get articles that need 3 or 4 because we're really dedicated to publishing a piece of work and it needs just a little bit extra work with that. And as an international journal, we're committed to publishing research from all geographic regions on all sorts of learning settings. And that means that a number of our authors, English is not the first language. So we'll be spending extra time often with those manuscripts with our reviewers to really make sure they're as strong as they can be for our international audience. And then from there, we write our editorials and we communicate to manage that. But that's basically our role, is to kind of bring in the articles, send them out, manage the review process, manage the perspectives of the authors and the reviewers, and provide constructive feedback and criticism to both. And make sure that that feedback, that two-directional feedback, is ethical, respective, and constructive, and not destructive or harsh. There's really no place for that. We want to build a community of researchers, and hiding behind blind review to make comments that are inappropriate or rough is not what we're interested in. So we do our best to manage that as best as possible. So from there, we're really now to the peer review point here, and I'm going to pass this over to Gwen, who will talk a little bit more about the roles and the purposes of peer review.
Thanks, Alex. So I suppose thinking about peer review, and we're really hoping that some of you will engage in peer review at some particular point in time. But we do want to just emphasize the reason why peer review is so critically important. And I suppose some of these might seem obvious, but especially now in an era of post-truth and misinformation, peer review is absolutely the fundamental foundation for scholarly publishing and dissemination. It safeguards against flawed research. And as Francisco was talking about, when we don't get a clear picture, or sometimes research is put out there that is not peer reviewed, it can be really unreliable. And peer review, therefore, prevents, or at least it does its best. It's not perfect by any means, but it certainly does go some way to preventing the spread of misinformation or indeed flawed research, which is so important in the field of education, in the field of social science, and particularly in music education. And it's essential for integrity and reliability of published research. So sometimes we know that, some research gets out into the media because it's timely, it's relevant, it's a hot topic, but it's so important that it's really grounded in scholarship. And so it upholds the value of academic publishing, because otherwise we could all just publish and put stuff out there. Very importantly, I think the most important thing, and my previous role in supporting students and colleagues in how to give feedback and also how to improve teaching and learning in particular, is that peer review supports scholars and authors in getting better at writing and improving their scholarship. We all benefit from this, no matter how advanced or how senior we are. We always need other people's eyes on our work to give us constructive feedback. And so from that point of view, it's a really beneficial process to help authors generate stronger arguments, to improve the writing style and substance of the actual arguments that they're making. Really important here is that it can increase the impact and the reach of the research when it's very carefully peer reviewed, and when we can see the context of the research, the international relevance. You can just see how that ripple effect can happen when it's really well reviewed by others. And of course, to share insights with the international community, because it's not just about scholarship, it's also about practice and policy as well. If you wouldn't mind, Alex, rolling on to the next slide. I can't actually change it. Thank you. So the benefits of engaging. Well, so why should you engage? I mean, peer review takes time. It's not remunerated, but at the same time, it's really important for those who are embarking in academia or involved in it to get involved. So the first thing I would say is, from my perspective, and I think everyone here in the co-editor team would agree, is that it gives you insights into the latest, the most contemporary developments in the field. So you can see what the zeitgeist is. What are the key topics that are coming in, that people are examining? What are really relevant in different jurisdictions, in different regions of the world? Secondly, it's also an opportunity for professional development and around your own scholarship, but also how do you give constructive feedback? In other words, if you have received feedback and reviews, how do you like for these to land when someone else receives them? And I think that's really, really important, as Alex mentioned, that it's constructive, that it's critical, and useful. If you can do something with the feedback, that it helps to move it forward. It's a really essential component in terms of academic career development, for tenure, for progression, for promotion, to demonstrate that you are held in the esteem to be able to give constructive peer review. So that's a really critical element as well. But I think these two are really the most salient, I suppose, in terms of why you might want to get on board today or after today. And it's that when you critically appraise the scholarship of others, it really helps to illuminate the blind spots in your own research. So when you spot things, for example, that the contribution is not clear, when you're reading going, what's the point of this article, this research? When you go to write, you'll see I need to also make this much more explicit when I go to write. And ultimately, it can improve your own writing and scholarship through that process. So there are many benefits to engaging in peer review from the point of view of your own academic and scholarly development. I think we can move on then. And I suppose, what do peer reviewers do and what are the expectations and the roles? And definitely at IJME, we have this process where we want those who submit manuscripts to the journal to have a consistent and a good experience in terms of peer review. So we always try our best to make sure that when it goes for the first round of review, so say it goes to 2 to 3 reviewers, we try and make sure that those reviewers also review the revised manuscript. Okay, and that's so that for the author, they're not getting mixed messages from 2 new perspectives after that fact. But if you were engaging in this process for the first time, these are the kind of things that we would expect you to look out for. So in the first read of the manuscript, does it have potential to advance the field? Is it just rehashing existing knowledge, or is it advancing it further? Is there a way that this will make sense, not just to a particular country or indeed a particular region of the world, or a context of, for example, KS3 education in the UK? How will that make sense to international readers across the globe? How can it be transferred? Are there, in terms of methodology, are there weaknesses in the methods that cannot be corrected? In other words, are there fundamental flaws in the way the research design is operationalized and articulated? That's really important, because ultimately that's the fulcrum on which the whole argument is made. So that's really important to look out for. Are there any other issues of trust or red flags, that perhaps we as co-editors are looking for you to point out and identify for us? And if there are any uncertainties here in relation to any of these issues, we're always available as co-editors to, if you want to check in with us, you can always email. And we often get that for people sometimes say, I'm not sure, this looks like it could be generated by AI, but could you advise before you embark on the peer review? In terms of the feedback, so feedback is a hugely emotional process. If you've ever received feedback from a supervisor or advisor, from a colleague, from an anonymous blind reviewer, sometimes it takes a while for it to land and to sink in, no matter whether it's positive or negative. The first piece is that you're going to be reading going, where did I do well? Okay, what was good in my writing, and what do I need to amend? So the feedback here, we're looking for our reviewers to give a top level summary. We really do need the authors to know whether there is a strong contribution to the field, if that's explicit or not, whether it's scholarly, and the writing is appropriate, whether it's rigorous in terms of its approach and methodology. Is the literature review sufficient, or is it just a simple gloss over some key literature that was a little bit ad hoc and that's not rigorous. And what's the potential? So, even though it's not never going to be a perfect piece, it's very rare for people for submissions to receive an immediate accept. That's, I think, we all know that's a rarity, and certainly minor revisions can often be extremely rare as well. So every author is expecting that they're going to get pointers as to what they need to do to get it over the line. So we really do need comments that are specific. This can be in the form of a list or under, as we said, those headings. And to make this manuscript more rigorous, it needs, this needs, you're advised to strongly include literature from. So very specific recommendations are what the author needs from peer reviewers. We really need it to be constructive. So there is a very clear potential contribution here. However, it would really benefit from the following adjustments or amendments. So constructive, no personal attacks or snarky comments. And of course, we hope that nobody's going to embark on that, but it's really important because these can be potential damaging. Either way, as co-editors, our job as gatekeepers here is to ensure that none of that goes back out. So even if there are, comments that appear to be personal, they'll be edited out. Okay, so that's really important, and that's part of our role in terms of the ethical process. Always important to remember is not all authors are English native speakers and writers. And of course, it's important to be sensitive to that. And in the writing and the recommendations, not to be making generalized comments like, well, this English is clearly not up to scratch. There are editing services provided by Sage, but also available to authors to improve their English. So those kind of things can be amended and improved. But ultimately, the fundamental arguments and the methods, if they're not robust, then really it doesn't really matter how much English improvement will happen. They're the fundamental things we need peer reviewers to look at. Okay, so in writing the feedback to the editors, there's two sections. So on the Sage Scholar One system, you'll have one section which is feedback to the editors. There may be comments you might want to make that are specific that you're unsure about. So for example, we do need to know, is it advancing the field enough to be published? And sometimes you might be on the fence thinking, this could be major revisions, it could be reject. I'm not really 100% sure. So in that box is where you can, let us know if you're a little bit uncertain. And if you're not sure whether it's relevant to an international audience, you can always insert that there. That's not to go into the feedback to the authors, that's that editor box. The recommendations for next steps, there are only 4 options here. And this is where sometimes it can be where you're a little bit uncertain, but it's okay to articulate that in that feedback to the editors. Do please provide any questions or red flags. So we have had experiences over the years where sometimes people will spot something that looks like it could be plagiarized from someone else's research. And it's really important that this is highlighted to the editors in this section. This is only viewed by us, so authors and other reviewers will not see the comments that are made to the editor. So that's really important.
Great.
Do I want to hand back to you, Alex? Yeah, okay, for the last bit. Great, thanks a million.
I did notice there were a couple questions that were relevant to the peer review process, and I'll just bring those forward. So one of them was asking, are peer reviewers always native speakers in English? And the answer is no. Not even all of us co-editors are originally native speakers of English with that. And so, we're reviewers don't have to have that. They need to have some working fluency in English, obviously, to provide the feedback with that, which relates to our second question: what are the criteria to become a peer reviewer? And for us, we're looking for people who are either pretty far along in their doctoral study, who've studied research methods, or who have graduated with that and working in the field. Normally, we will be going to our editorial board, for which anybody who's completed their research studies is eligible to apply for consideration every 2 years through ISME. They put out that, and we try to select people who are newly in the field as researchers, as well as middle career and senior, because often there's new methodologies, there's new approaches, and people who are just coming out of their research studies are often more familiar with recent research in some cases and innovations in methodology. So we're happy to bring them on. And then it's who we notice. But we're always interested if there's people who are interested, they can, in serving as a peer reviewer, we're more than happy to have you reach out to us via the ijme@isme.org email. And we'd be happy to dialogue with you about that, because we are looking for that. So there's another comment which we'll come back to later, but to kind of wrap up, and I know we're pushing our original estimated time, we wanted to really also highlight for you some challenges that are facing peer review at our thing. And one of the big ones is undisclosed use, as I hinted to earlier, of artificial intelligence. AI tools being used to support writing and other phases of the research and publication process. They're only going to become more available, and working with that. It's pretty easy right now for us to spot articles that are written almost completely by AI without human editing, and we flag those and we do not accept them. But it's going to be used more and more as a research tool and working with that. And so we strongly encourage, in fact, the guidelines that are kind of emerging from our professional organizations and that are that any use of AI should be disclosed. It's part of your methods. It's part of how you're designing your studies, how you're writing them up, how you're conducting them. The readers need to know, just like if you're using SPSS and certain analytical techniques for a quantitative study, or a particular technology for transcribing and analyzing video, it's a tool and it should be part of that and disclosed, because many of them right now are generating fake citations, which is the one of the first things that we're able to notice, because it might be a journal that's generated that doesn't exist, or working with that. And so we really need you to disclose that. There's also kind of challenges with increased incentives to publish. Many places around the world have very strong guidelines. In order to get promoted and advanced, you have to publish, and you have to get your research published, and you have to get your research published in top journals, which we're very fortunate that IJME is considered one of the top journals by a number of the metrics that are used by organizations for promotion. But it can sometimes lead to people trying to publish a lot, quantity over quality. And our main role here as peer reviewers and as editors is to really make sure that we're getting the best research. IJME wants to be known for publishing the best research in the field that really moves things forward. And so we spend a lot of time as editors reviewing, and we encourage our reviewers to go through and look at and double check a reference, because sometimes AI might return a reference, and I might be tempted to bring that in to cite it. But if you actually go in and look at that reference, it has nothing to do with what was cited, and that is the number one flag for us. And we encourage all of our peer reviewers to spot check these references to make sure that's the case. Again, it's about research quality, integrity, trustworthiness. And there's also these pushes to publish research that you might have a personal conflict with, to kind of use it to justify. We've sometimes run into articles like that. And there's also, because of the incentives for promotion, that some people will go ahead and add and cite their friend's work or their other work or their own work in order to bump their citation counts. And that's also something that we will look at very carefully to make sure that, again, that if really what you're citing can be cited with one quality reference and not citing 4 different articles by the same person or yourself as an author, we will come back, and we encourage our reviewers to do that. Very rarely does there need to be all of that in there. Sometimes it makes sense, but we're really trying to be mindful of that. The other somewhat recent development are what are called paper mills, where you can pay money to have other people write your articles for you, submit them, manage the peer review process. And we're getting better at detecting that. Sage, who's our publication partner, has additional tools that make it somewhat easier for us to detect that that's the case. Again, there are services out there for helping you improve your writing and consulting on that, but that's a different kind of use than actually hiring other people to write. And a lot of what we end up desk rejecting shows evidence of having been written for hire. And that's something that we don't have any tolerance for, and we do our best and encourage the reviewers that if they see maybe evidence that it was a data set from another study that doesn't relate, or that if it seems that it just doesn't make sense, maybe it was a study that was in another field and they swapped out social science education for music education, we occasionally get those. So these are what we end up spending a lot of our time sorting through. And I think the largest one challenge we have is just making sure we have amazing peer reviewers. And that's why we're here talking with you today and providing some of these insights and tips from our own work around what it is. And for me, it really comes down to really, if you are in that position of being a peer reviewer, it's what's the feedback you would want to have as that, and really be thinking through that, the specific, the constructive criticism, maybe being open to the fact that what you thought was a very clear argument and expression of what it is that you're studying might not be as clear to somebody else from another region of the world. And for us, when we're assigning peer reviewers and inviting peer reviewers, we often will deliberately invite people from a diversity of geographic regions, just to make sure that for our international audience, the articles we're putting through have relevance and clarity with that. So from this point here, I'll just pause it again to throw it back to Francisco and Gwen to see if you have any other points before we open it up for Q&A, and then going through some of the questions in the chat. If you still have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring them and answering to them as they come forward. Gwen, Francisco?
Right. I just wanted to add just quick, because I more or less forgot to talk, but when talking about quantity, it is really useful to include the effect size so we can interpret better the results. And more important, if just checking the actual of your data, if you're sharing with us from the beginning your data, those data are more than welcome. So we can run, it is not that we cannot trust you, but from time to time, those results, especially with the thing that Alice was talking about, paper mills and fake and fake research. If you provide us with the data, it will, let's say, make the whole process easier, so we can run into the reviews faster. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to add that certainly in some jurisdictions in the world now, things are really moving to an open science framework, which means that research protocols are often shared in advance on databases that essentially ensure the rigor. So if I'm going to do a mixed method study with collaborators, the research protocol, we have agreed what's happening in terms of all this research design, the steps, the tools, and we put that out there right in advance, and that assures to some extent the rigor that's going behind an actual study. Now, sometimes certain qualitative research, it's not possible to share data sets without breaching confidentiality and anonymity. So those things are often on, but certainly for things like the instruments, they can be included as an appendix at the end of the article. In fact, they should. So if it is a survey questionnaire, and there are key things that can be added. But also, if I was doing a survey questionnaire, I would have that up on that open science repository to share the link with the editors if needed. If not, why not? So, and similarly, if there's an interview protocol or interview guide, that should be included. So this is making the research process transparent and upfront. And as Francisco was saying, we do frequently, when we're not clear on the statistical side of things, the data set, which is clearly numerical mostly, it is required to be shared. We do ask for that with follow up, and more often, those data sets are being, Open Science is asking for those to be shared up on repositories. So that's a really important area, in particularly in relation to the quantitative side of things. So that's just an addition there. We did have a question. I don't know if you wanted to raise it yet, Alex, or
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple
yeah.
in here which we can go through and then open it up from
Okay.
there. One of them that was
Yeah.
shared here was a question about the human subjects ethics, the Institutional Review Board, IRB. And the question is, what about authors that are not attached to any institution or are a practitioner? For example, you're a school teacher or a private music teacher. And absolutely, we're more than happy to receive those research studies. You're just going to have to disclose the processes that you went through to ensure that there was informed consent, that there was permission given, that if you were going to anonymize participation, that you went to those efforts. So at the end of the day, all research with human subjects that comes to us in order to move forward needs to have been conducted ethically. And the primary way that happens is that if you're affiliated with an institution that has a review board that goes through that. If for some reason you don't, we're still going to hold the research to that level, and you're going to have to explain how you did that, because sometimes we're working with independent researchers who are working on their own. Sometimes it's with a school, but there are also third-party institutional review boards out there that can review studies if you are unaffiliated. But in most cases where we've had that happen, it's been a seasoned researcher who's no longer at their institution. They want to continue to be active, but they go ahead and provide a fulsome description of their processes so that the editors can review it and the reviewers can. Again, it all comes down to writing trustworthy, reliable, ethical research with that. So hopefully that answers that question. If not, please follow up. And then there was one more question that emerged in here. Let's see here. I'm just scrolling down. Do desk rejections or reviewed rejections provide any feedback as to why the article was rejected? And the answer to that is yes. We will do our best if it's a desk rejection to tell you why. We might not get into really deep specifics. But we do try to add as best we can, descriptions for why. So if we notice that there are maybe some flaws or in terms of methodological concerns that we don't think it's going to be successful with peer review, we will be sure to tell you that and tell you why at the desk level. And then all of the reviewers are asked to provide very constructive comments to you. Even if a decision is made to reject, you're at least going to have 2 to 3 peer reviewers who've engaged in giving you constructive feedback about what's there and hopefully the rationale why. And then if there's other material that we as editors need to add in to contextualize that or provide that detail, we do our best. Likewise, if for some reason you do get a review back, a reject, or even a minor revisions or major revisions, and you have questions about the requests, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you a reply and help explain that, because it might be you get conflicting guidance from one reviewer and from another, and you're trying to figure out how to move forward. And one of the things that, particularly as an early career scholar, is challenging is to actually write back and to defend yourself. And this is where our role as co-editors is also there to be an advocate for you, because, ultimately it's, what do you need to do for your study and working with that? It still might not mean that the reviewers and the editors eventually don't decide to, we'll take into account and maybe accept or reject. But if you have questions, you're more than please reach out and let us know, and we will do our best to help clarify or help you think through to the extent we can around that. Any additional kind of feedback on those questions, Gwen or Francisco, or maybe there's other questions people have?
don't think so, not from me. Maybe we might hand back to Adam perhaps in a moment and see if there's other questions or.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great presentation. I was going through through the slides and listening to you, and I feel that I'm always learning about it. It's a process that I'm familiar with, of course, to some degree, but there's always something to pay greater attention to, or have a different angle that's very helpful. I'm looking at the chat, and I think I can't see new questions. You can all still post in the chat. If anyone has questions, then please do. Yes, and if I might have a question myself, I was wondering because I think it was Francesco who was talking about the importance of being very clear about the sample, the participants, and also the numbers. That of course very small samples are less likely to be published, which is understandable. But I was wondering if you have any specific thoughts or advice on qualitative studies, which naturally often have smaller samples. And of course, it is very important, but it's also sometimes I find it challenging to be very clear and precise and really justify why this sample is what it is. But then on the other hand, sometimes it feels that, especially if we think about studies with vulnerable groups or communities where this very careful reaching out and collecting the data is a very, very sensitive process, then sometimes going for a bigger sample might actually be go against the ethics of the research. So I was just wondering if you could share any thoughts on that to the people who do mostly qualitative research.
I'm happy to start and hear from the rest of you. I mean, I think you bring up a good point, that for it's a whole spectrum. I mean, we're beyond the days of just quantitative qual. We're in post qual. We're in, there's all sorts of really innovative research methodologies. And what's most important is that you've matched your research methods to the questions and what you're looking at with that. And, certain statistical tests and quantitative measures are really meant for understanding larger groups and larger samples with that. Whereas maybe some more qualitative techniques are better for going deep and getting nuance and complexity. And then there's always a blend of that. You might still ask some quantitative questions and have some quantitative data to help contextualize or make sense of the sample or the population that you're working from, but you might not be able to run parametric or inferential statistics on it, but you still might be able to use that to inform a mapping of the sample and providing some understanding. So it really is about, I think, from a qualitative, and I would say we're at a point where we're publishing more qualitative than quantitative. It's about being really rich in the description and being very clear in how you recruited your participants, why you recruited them, what are your theoretical frames, and what is the contribution? Because we can't just rely on statistical tests to say, okay, this is significant, therefore it's worth advancing the field. In a smaller sample qualitative study, the burden is on the author to kind of craft a story and a narrative and a rich enough description so that the readers are in a position to see, is this transferable to my situation? Is this with that? It's a different kind of epistemology. It's a different way of looking at the role and the nature of the research. And is it written in a way? And we're always looking at our qualitative research from that. How does it impact and advance the field? Even if it's with a small group, how does it advance? How did this treatment, how did this thing help this group of people go through? Or how did an analysis of these 3 or 4 people's experience learning, teaching music, having some experience impact their role in teaching? And that somehow through telling that story, it advances the field in some way. So we're beyond historical areas where only the quantitative and behaviorist research was kind of there, to now really embracing interpretivist, autoethnographic, more experimental mixed methods with that. And it's really just being clear, and are you telling a story that's trustworthy and reliable and makes the case that there's some impact here that is worth sharing with the broader research community in music education. Gwen, anything you'd add to that, or Francisco?
I think you've encapsulated that really well, Alex, and I would agree, because in some cases there will be a group that, as you mentioned, Adam, it could be by default it's a small group, it's a small cohort in terms of qualitative research. There may be so it's a limitation in a way, but another way of looking at that is that it could also be a strength, because the rich dialogue that might emerge from that group could actually really advance the field. But I suppose, as Alex has said, yeah, from my point of view, it really is about, if it is one focus group of teachers that happens to be a convenient sample in the school, why that school, why those, so again, clearly justifying why this is it's not just, I think I'll do a paper and I'll see if I can get this done in the next month. A sort of a flippant approach to research is not what we want. There's nothing to say that small scale studies like case studies and studies of practice can go into teacher magazines or into other blogs and formats. But for something that's a scholarly journal, it's expected to move the field on in some way. So I think that's really critical, anyway, from my point of view.
Yes, thank you so much for this great advice. I see that we have some new questions. Would you like to address them? There's one that is about the terms of music education. In what topics in terms of music education could be rejected that are not in the scope of the journal?
Sure. I think sometimes, at least when I think about in the past year, what's come before and where we really felt that there wasn't a fit is if it was very clearly about musicology or music history, or practices that are not directly connected to music teaching and learning. They might be tangentially, it might have implications, but in the manuscript, that wasn't obvious to that. There wasn't literature that made it connect to music learning and teaching internationally, or implications drawn for music education. So it's more than often just not on topic with that. So sometimes it's musicology, sometimes it's music psychology, sometimes it's music technology. With that, so we generally don't publish studies that are looking at evaluating a particular software app, because and again, it's not because it's technology or it's a software app, it's because that the intervention or the use of that app is not fully described enough for a reader to actually know what was happening. So maybe you did a study and you said it was on, this group used GarageBand, but then you didn't tell the reader about, well, how did they use it? What was it about the way they interacted with it? What were you trying to teach? It was more like, okay, I did this pre-test. They used GarageBand for here, and then they did a post-test. So a lot of it is just research that's just not very well described and contextualized. So it's not necessarily about the topic. It's about, is it fully described? Is there impact? And is it contextualized again for the international audience? And I would say more of the things that get rejected at the desk are because they weren't contextualized for IJME. They might be a very local study like that. Maybe I am looking at a particular American choral rehearsal, but I'm only citing people in America, and I'm not contextualizing it to maybe what the life of a choral teacher is outside of that. Because, if it is something that's really hyper specific to a particular country, there are other research journals that you can publish in that have that country or that region as the primary audience. And you might choose that if you only have 6,000 words, and you really have a lot of rich description, but you want to make an assumption that your reader understands certain things, maybe it is better put in a more local or regional journal than in the international journal, where you have to dedicate extra words to make sure that it's with that. And so that might be that IJME is not the best fit for the article. And we do our best as well when we receive these articles to say that, boy, this seems like this would be a better fit for X journal. We do our best to kind of share that with you if we think that's the case.
Thank you. There are a few more questions. The one that came next is about the use of AI. Any advice on using AI effectively and ethically I guess, in the process of writing an academic paper?
Sure, I'll take a stab and then please chime in. So I am all about AI. And again, people might have different views and reviewers might have different reviews. But if AI helps me write a little better with like grammar correction or things like that, I use that in my daily life. But if I'm going to write an article, I'm going to tell the reader and that I used it for that purpose. So I think that particularly for those of us who are in the call who, for English is not your major language, using that to help improve your expression certainly seems to me, as long as it's disclosed, is that. I'm also actively working with my students in using AI to make suggestions and considerations around research design. There's a lot out there that you can ask around that, but it should then be disclosed that you used AI as a research partner of sorts in how you conceptualized your questions or your methods. Where it crosses a line for me is if you're analyzing your data with AI, and a lot of that has to do with, did you get ethical approval to take research participant data and upload it to a third-party commercial AI service where you're giving that data away? In many cases, you're violating informed consent and work with that. But I know, having sat on institutional review boards, we are now getting more and more applications where researchers are disclosing that they're using AI for that. And if that is part of your proposed research methodology, that has to be disclosed to the ethics review board and approved, and then provided to your participants via informed consent that you are going to do, and they know that that's happening with that. So we're in this really interesting age where it's only going to become more pervasive, and I think the ethical way is to disclose it, informed consent, get approvals, and work with it, because it's not going to go away. Gwen or Francisco, how do you feel about it?
I suppose I'm a bit on the fence, being honest. I mean, I like that's in my own work and not specifically related to the role of still wearing a different hat. Certainly with the co-editor hat, I will, I look at the COPE guidelines. So the guidelines are there on the SAGE website, and I agree to an extent. I think that there are, in the European context, there are different guidelines that for the jurisdiction of Europe. So if I'm doing research in Europe, I have to abide by those. It's not necessarily what IJME says. I have to abide by the ones in my country and also in the region. So the European guidelines would be perhaps differ. And certainly there'd be, like in our local context in my institution, there's no permission whatsoever to share anybody's data with a third party like that, unless it's had a data protection impact assessment, which is a huge ordeal. But apart from that, it's more for me around, the potential for bias. And, I guess, look, there's a whole area around this that I think we are going to, at some point, write or put out a special issue. So we might be actually asking for papers around this topic at some particular point in time. And maybe, Elizabeth, you want to perhaps consider contributing to it. So ultimately, I think that it's an ongoing, it's a moving issue, and I think that there are lots of ways to look at it. I do agree with Alex in relation to any kind of tools that can, take down barriers for accessibility in terms of language, in terms of approach, in terms of neurodivergency and different needs. Yes, But again, approaching it very carefully is ultimately, for me, really, really important.
Thank you. And I can see one more question. Whether the journal considers systematic reviews or scoping reviews for publication. And yeah, if the acceptance rates of these types of studies are generally lower compared to qualitative and quantitative research.
Sure. So in general, the answer is that IJME does not generally welcome these studies. That said, there have been exceptions. You might even find some in the past few years. But again, it's because for us, we're going back to that main question that we shared in the earlier slides. Does this advance the field of music education? And in many cases, a scoping review or a systematic literature review might just not summarize enough studies to really advance the field. And I would say my personal bias in and around this is that it's fine to use a systematic process and a scoping process to generate that, but what are the insights that you're drawing? Is it about the design of research studies? Is it about identifying gaps and mapping research? Do you have enough studies to really be worth that to be here? In our field, we're fortunate to have, for instance, update applications of research in music education, also published by SAGE out of the United States, which very much welcomes these kinds of reviews, as well as a discussion around the implications for practice from that. So our field does generally have venues for that. It's just in general, I would say most of the ones that we have seen submitted to us haven't met the bar for really advancing the field. We did publish a study a couple years ago, which was a scoping analysis of over 1,000 research articles published in China, that we felt very strongly that because it did such a large survey and summarized that would be of value to the researchers in the field. It was very well done, and it had a huge sample size of articles that made the cut, and really became an opportunity and something that we felt as the journal would help serve as a resource for people who were interested in better understanding research that had been published in Chinese, another language, so that the broader field of music education could do that. So there always are exceptions to this. I would just say that in general, the acceptance rate is low. And again, if you are curious or on the fence about whether it is, please send us an email, ijme@isme.org. We're more than happy to take a look at it and provide you a quick kind of feedback or decision on whether or not we think it's good to go forward. So if you're ever worried about that, our email is open. You're welcome to email us. You don't have to submit it and then wait and see. We'll do our best to give you counsel on that prior to submission. We love chatting with people about that. So we do encourage you to reach out.
Okay, we have two more questions, and I think they will have to be the last questions in this session because we will have to wrap it up in a few minutes. So the first question is, would more narrative literature reviews be received differently than systematic scoping reviews? Yeah, so maybe if
not necessarily. It's not really an issue of was it narrative, was it systematic, was it scoping? These are all techniques for sharing and disseminating. It's more, how does a review of the literature advance the field with that? And is that summary and the implications drawn from it relevant to the international audience of IJME? Those are really the main criteria rather than the particular methods. And I think, again, that's if there's a point that we want to kind of reinforce and echo, that it's not really about a particular methodology or a particular topic. It's, does this study advance the field and move it forward? And is it contextualized for an international audience? Those are our two primary criteria that we're looking through first and foremost, and that we're asking our reviewers to do as well in going through it. We understand that's a fairly gray area and not as maybe concrete as you might like, but that's why our door is open for further questions. Yeah.
And the last question is about the word limit. Since the journal is moving online, will there be a discussion to ease the word limit, especially with regard to qualitative and mixed method studies, which might be difficult to wrap up in 6,000 words, including references?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. And the reason we had 6,000 words initially goes back to physical page limits. And with that being lifted, it does open the opportunity for longer articles. And the other thing to also keep in mind is that for many of our articles that come in right around 6,000, after they go through a round or two of peer review and suggestions from that, they end up getting even longer, closer to 7,300, 7,500 with that. And I wouldn't say there's a specific upper limit, other than that for some studies, we have the ability to publish supplemental material, or if you make the case with mixed methods and that depth is needed, and ultimately at the end of the day, that it's well written and communicates what you need in that length, we're open to considering longer lengths. I would say overall, um, my personal experience is that when articles go beyond 7,000, 7,200 words, they have a tendency to be a little bit long, and could be perhaps condensed. So in those cases, we do go back and do a review if it's getting longer, and we'll do a review, we'll do a read of it as editors, and we'll ask reviewers to say, is this something that needs this many words? Can it be said more clearly, more effectively? So it's not just always about adding more when you're responding to a peer review. It's like, are you writing your study more clearly? And if you need that clarity and you've made the case that you need that clarity and you need 8,000 words, we'll work with you on it. But in general, particularly for early scholars, having that shorter length can actually be a help in making sure that you're communicating it clearly and putting it there. That said, one of the most important techniques that I use and that I encourage authors to use is to be liberal in figures and drawings and graphics and visuals to communicate, because in many times that can help reduce your word count and make things a whole lot clearer. So please be sure to remember that a figure can say, and a photo that we can now publish in color online can really go a long way. So we also encourage you to use those and not just narrative words to convey. It's really a multimedia world now, and that can also help with the overall word count. Gwen,
Thank you
Francisco?
so much.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree in that the other thing to bear in mind is if you're acting as peer reviewers, which we hope you will, ultimately, would I prefer to be given an article or allocated an article that's 8,000 words or 6,000 words? And I think I know if it's possible, I'd rather read 6,000 for the message to come across and not be giving feedback on 8,000. So I suppose it works both ways, and sometimes less is more, as Alex mentioned, so you can use some sort of imagery or graphs to try and communicate and explain your argument or your point. So yeah, just wanted to add that. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gwen, Alex, and Francisco for this great opportunity to learn about the details of the reviewing process and for encouraging us to also become reviewers at a point. And thank you to all of you for your participation. It's great to see so many people in the ISME Online Cafe. And just a final reminder, after every meeting, we send out an anonymous participant survey to everyone who participated. And this is our way of learning what is it that you liked about the meetings, if there's anything that you'd want to improve. So this is really, really important to us to get the feedback from all participants. It is anonymous. We we also don't collect the information about the country or location, so you can feel safe to share your thoughts and experience with us. I will post the link now in the chat, but you will also get it via email after the session has concluded. And thank you so much. Thank you also to Sri for supporting us as always. And we hope to see you in our next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.